All right, so today we're here to talk about the secrets of the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx. We're going to first talk about the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx, then we're going to look at the astrology of the next 30 years to see when the prophecies are going to be fulfilled, and then we're going to talk toward the end about what the prophecies are and how they might manifest. So this is the Great Pyramid of Giza. Casey said that the Great Pyramid was built as a temple of initiation, and that both Jesus and John the Baptist went through an initiation in the Great Pyramid. Of course, the Egyptologists tell us that it's a tomb for ancient pharaohs, but no pharaohs have ever been found in any of the large pyramids. And in fact, a few years ago, Zahia Was, the director of antiquities for Egypt, was here at ARE, and a little old lady came to the microphone when he asked for questions, and she said, "Have there ever been any indigenous burials found in any of the large pyramids?" And he said, "No." And she said, "Well, then they're not tombs, are they?" One question, she destroyed all of the myths of Egyptology. And I was on a radio program about a week ago, and it's a metaphysical radio program, and I told the host, he talked about, we were talking about the Great Pyramid, and I said that Casey said it was a temple of initiation. And he said he had heard all kinds of explanations about the Great Pyramid, but he had never heard that one. And that was interesting to me, because that's actually what it is. It's a temple of initiation. All right, this is the interior of the Great Pyramid. This is the descending passage. This is the first passage that they discovered. And after a while, they were in this passage and they heard a rock fall in the Grand Gallery, so they realized that there was more up here than what they had just discovered. So they took dynamite and blasted through a 24-foot granite plug right here to discover the Grand Gallery and the so-called King's Chamber. In addition to being a temple of initiation, Casey said that the Great Pyramid was prophecy in stone. He said that the prophecies contained in the Great Pyramid were correct as to the day, place, time, and individuals involved. And one of the things that he said was that the sarcophagus here in the so-called King's Chamber and the top were part of this prophecy. And he said that the prophecy was directed with the colors of the stones and the directions of the stones. So this is the King's Chamber and the top. I looked at this diagram for years trying to figure it out. I was like, what is this? What does this mean exactly? I never could figure it out. And then one day I was in that sort of sleeping, waking state, that in-between state. And suddenly it hit me. This is an arrow, and it represents, Casey said that the empty tomb here and the top represented the changes which would occur in religious thought during our time period. And I realized that this is a physical representation of the Kundalini, of the 7 endocrine centers, and raising your energy through meditation. And the 5 lower stones here are made out of red granite, which represents the body, the 4 lower centers, and then the thyroid in the neck. And this stone here is actually narrower than the 4 lower stones. It actually physically represents what the neck looks like in the body. Then the two higher stones here are made of gray limestone, and they are connected. And the pituitary and the pineal are the 2 higher centers, and they are connected by the hypothalamus. In addition, the brain, of course, is gray, and they used gray limestone for those 2 stones. So basically what Casey is telling us is that this representation represents the realization that you raise your spiritual vibration through meditation and kundalini, and that this will be the change that occurs in religious thought during our time period. This is the sarcophagus. Tourists have chipped away pieces of it. Casey said that both Jesus and John the Baptist went through an initiation in the Great Pyramid, and he never really talked too much about what the initiation would entail, but apparently it involved laying in this sarcophagus. The priest would bring the initiate in, he would lay in the sarcophagus, they would leave. So here you have someone meditating in a place where there's no sound, no light, literally no light. You could wave your hand in front of you, you wouldn't be able to see it. In addition, you have this enormous pyramid concentrating all of its energy on the central point of the pyramid. This is in the center of the pyramid. So it was specifically designed as a place to meditate without sound or light, and with all of the pyramid energy focusing on you. So I think that's what the initiation was. Now, one thing I always wondered, how did they get into the king's chamber for the initiation? Because there was this 24-foot granite plug. So I assumed that there had to be other entrances to the king's chamber. Now there's a French architect who quit his job, sold his house, moved into a studio apartment in Paris, and decided to dedicate his life to figuring out how the Great Pyramid was built. And after about a year, the French government gave him $100,000 a year and a staff of 5, because they heard about what he was doing. And his name is Jean-Pierre Houdin, and he has basically figured out how they built the Great Pyramid. This is the Grand Gallery right here. And what they did was they had a wooden sled. I'll go back to here. They had a wooden sled here that they used to pull the large stones, these large stones, up the other side. These granite stones are heavy, so they had a wooden sled that they used. And one of the things that makes this so convincing is that when he went to the Grand Gallery to examine it for evidence of this sled, the grease stains from the sled are still on the walls down here of the Grand Gallery. There's literally a black line that you can see where they greased it up to bring that sled down to haul up the larger blocks. And one of the things that he did was he had to figure out how they raised those stones up. You know, there's always been this problem with figuring out how the Great Pyramid was built. If they had an external ramp, then the ramp had to be larger than the pyramid itself. And there's no evidence that they had an external ramp. So he figured out that they had to use an internal ramp, shaped almost like a corkscrew, like a squared off corkscrew, and that they hauled the stones up in the interior of the pyramid. And this is what he has figured out, that they had an internal ramp like that, and that's how it was done. Very clever. And in these corner portions here, he figured that they had to have a place on the outside, a notch on the outside of the pyramid where they could turn the stones, almost like you see those old railroad car things where they would turn the railroad car around. And if we can go back to the outside of the Great Pyramid, if you look up here, there's still one of those notches there. And he actually got permission from the Egyptian government to go up and examine it, and he did, but of course there's they'd have to move a few stones to find the ramp. But anyway, another thing is that the sled coming down the Grand Gallery, there's a step right here, and it's kind of like this step here, and he figured out that it had to have a notch in it like this, a V-shaped notch, in order to accommodate the ropes for the sled that was pulling the stones up the other side. But there was no notch there. So he thought, well, that's, what happened? How did they do this? Well, then he looked at photographs from the 1900s and realized that the notch was there, but they had filled it in with concrete. So you have the grease stains on the walls, you have the notch exactly where it's supposed to be, you have the notch on the outside of the pyramid, lending itself to his theory of an internal ramp shaped like a corkscrew. So after he'd figured all this out, he started to go around and lecture in France. And one day after his lecture, a guy came up to him and said, I've got the proof of your theory. He said, I'm a scientist. We did an internal scan of the Great Pyramid 20 years ago, and it actually shows that internal ramp. And this is the interior scan of the Great Pyramid he's talking about. It shows in the green area here the internal ramp. It's still there, and it shows up when you do an interior scan. This particular diagram is kind of like the other diagram I showed you. For years, I tried to figure out what this was, and I could never figure it out. I looked at it, and I just thought, I know there's something there, but I just don't know what it is. And Jean-Pierre has figured it out. He's definitely figured it out. So last year, the Egyptian government announced that they were going to do interior scans of all the pyramids, large pyramids in Egypt. This is the Egyptian antiquities minister explaining that. They were going to do a thermal scan of the outside of the pyramids, because any hot portion would indicate that there were open passages behind that stone. So they did first the external thermal scan, and then about a week ago, they did a muon scan of the interior of the Great Pyramid. This is him announcing the results of the exterior scan. That's the Great Pyramid in the background. What they found was, they found this one section of stones that were super hot on the outside of the Great Pyramid. So there's definitely something behind these stones. A passageway or a door or a room. And this is what they look like from the outside. It's these two stones right here. So they have now discovered where they know that there's some kind of secret behind these two stones, some kind of passage or room or whatever.
Isn't that union right there called the zipper?
I'm not sure.
You know how far up that is on the pyramid?
Oh no, that's the bottom.
Base?
Yeah, that's the base. That's right on the base. If you look back here, see he's standing right on the bedrock, and so it's right at the base of the Great Pyramid. Now, one of the things about Jean-Pierre Houdin that is so fascinating to me is that, we would go to the Great Pyramid, we would go to the King's Chamber, and we would just look at it, and it would just be like stones. We would just see stones. But as an architect, he looks at it and sees in his mind, why did they build it this way? He sees it from the builder's point of view. And it's amazing to me, you think about the millions of people that have been to the Great Pyramid, how many people had that knowledge or that way of looking at it? And so when he went into the King's Chamber, there were these stones on the outside around by the sarcophagus. And these stones are arranged in a very peculiar manner. They're arranged like a doorway. There are stones on the outside that come up, Then there's a giant transverse stone which takes all of the weight from above. Then there are 3 interior stones which are also transverse. And then right on the bottom, there's a stone which has no weight on it whatsoever. So in his mind, he's thinking that's where the secret entrance is to the king's chamber. And so they took razor blades, and they couldn't fit razor blades in all the other blocks, but that block on the bottom they could fit a credit card into. So remember I said that I always wondered, how did Jesus and John the Baptist get into the Great Pyramid if there was a 24-foot granite plug? Well, this stone right here could easily be removed. See how the stone above it, they've highlighted this. The stone above it has weight on either side, but not on this stone itself. So apparently when the initiates entered the Great Pyramid, they slid this stone away and entered right in front of the sarcophagus. And what's exciting is they just, like I said, about a week ago, they did the muon scan. They started with a muon scan of the Great Pyramid, but something sort of unusual has happened. A lot of us here know Zahi Hawass, who used to be the director of antiquities for Egypt, and he was always very much against any kind of scanning. He said that, the Egyptologists should be the ones that discover all this. And even when they began the scans back in November, he wrote a blistering magazine article condemning the whole thing and how the Egyptologists need to be in control, otherwise that mistakes would be made and this sort of thing. And then a week ago, when they did the muon scan, they announced that Zahi Hawass was now in charge of the scanning of the pyramids. So, and of course his tone has changed now. He's more, open to the scanning and that sort of thing. But for me, it's like people lie, but machines don't lie. So if a machine says there's a passage there, there's a passage there. It's almost like the UFO phenomena. The skeptics say, oh, well, it's a hoax, it's made up, it's mass hysteria. But, mass hysteria doesn't show up on radar. So anyway, I was very excited. I just discovered this in the last few weeks. Very excited to find this, that they finally figured this out. And Jean-Pierre has taken it one step further. He has sort of identified with the internal scans where the secret chambers are, where the corridors are. This is the king's chamber right here. This is the stone that we just saw. He's figured out that there's a corridor, then there's a room here, and then another room, and then there's a passageway that goes to the outside of the pyramid. Now this is what's called the common entrance of the Great Pyramid. And you see here there's an inverted V formation with these 2 large stones. And then right here, once again, are these stones where there's no downward pressure. So the assumption is that this is where the secret entrance was. And so we go back. And this corridor here eventually leads to this entrance. And evidence for this is indicated in travelers to the Great Pyramid in the 1800s reported that there was a room right behind these stones, and that they removed these stones and there was a room right behind it. So Jean-Pierre has figured out how the Great Pyramid was built, where the secret entrances are, where the secret entrance to the king's chamber is, and now they're doing muon scans to identify all the open passages in the Great Pyramid. So it's a really, really exciting time to be interested in all this. And years ago, ARE is very involved in doing research in the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx. And now it seems like Jean-Pierre and even the Egyptians themselves have sort of picked up that mantle and done the scanning. This is the Great Sphinx of Giza. It was carved out of a solid piece of rock, therefore it can't be carbon dated. The weathering on the Sphinx indicates that it's at least 10,000 years old. Casey said it was 10,500 BC. Casey also said that there was a repository of knowledge called the Hall of Records that was placed beneath the Sphinx by the Egyptians and the Atlanteans, and that in this Hall of Records was a record of the history of mankind from 10 million years BC up to 10,500 BC, and that there was a record there of who and when it would be opened. Casey said that the entrance to the Hall of Records was by the right front forepaw, and that this entrance would not be opened until the selfish motives of the world were broken up. Now, now, astrology tells us that every 2,165 years we move from one astrological age to the next. The previous age was the age of Aries, which is a fire sign symbolized by the ram. The religious practices then involved sacrificing a ram on the altar of fire. The current age is the age of Pisces, which is a water sign symbolized by the fish. So we have the rituals now involve a ritual baptism, and Jesus was the fisher of men. As we move into the age of Aquarius, the age of Aquarius is a air sign symbolized by a man pouring a pitcher of water. The religious practices will change probably to prana breathing or chanting, something having to do with air. And that is the period that Casey is talking about. The beginning of the age of Aquarius, the Bible calls it the 1,000 years of peace. It's this break in history that is not so far away when war is ended and the selfish motives of the world are broken up. So Casey is telling us that the Hall of Records will be opened, culminating, or I should say coinciding, with that break in history that's coming. For years, the ARE did a lot of research trying to figure out where the entrance to the Hall of Records was. Hugh Lynn Casey was very much involved in that. And the Sphinx is funny. The Sphinx has so many different passages and holes in it. There's all kinds of things. There's a hole behind the head that they found the tip of the beard in. Somebody had stuffed the tip of the beard in there. There's a giant fissure right here, a natural crack in the back of the Sphinx. And when they uncovered the Sphinx in the 1920s, they filled that crack in with concrete. And it's funny, when they uncovered the Sphinx in the 1920s, they didn't really keep a record of what they found or anything. So a lot of what we know about that, we have to gather from photographs and all that. And one of the photographs shows that there was a giant hole in the side of the Sphinx here where you see all of this. They filled in with all this masonry. Now this is the back of the Sphinx. There's a hole here where apparently like grave robbers or something dug a hole deep into the Sphinx looking for treasure or whatever. But when they poured that concrete down in the fissure in the 1920s, it blocked that passage, so it only goes to that point. In addition, there are all these masonry boxes on the side of the Sphinx, and no one has ever dismantled those masonry boxes to see what is behind them or underneath them or anything. It seems astonishing that one of the world's most famous statues has all these boxes and they've never explored them. Now in 1978, Stanford Research Institute did soundings along the right front forepaw of the Sphinx. And what they discovered was that there is a vertical shaft in the area of this masonry box. And as I mentioned before, there are photographs from the 20s that indicate that there's a hole right here. Then in 1982, they did acoustical soundings Let me go back. All along the right front forepaw of the Sphinx. And acoustical soundings, the way that works is they take a metal plate and they put it on the ground, they take a sledgehammer and they hit the metal plate. And that sounding, they judge the sounding to tell if there are open chambers there. So they did soundings all along the right front forepaw of the Sphinx, found no indication of passages or anything like that, or an entrance to the Hall of Records. But on the last afternoon of the last day, Mark Lehner, who was in charge of the Sphinx, insisted that they do soundings inside this box. And what they found was openings in 3 different places. So there we have the indication of where the entrance to the Hall of Records is. It is probably underneath or around or close to this box right here. Oh, and one other thing. When they uncovered the Sphinx in the 1850s, well, let me back up a little bit. There's a legend that a pharaoh found a secret chamber under the Sphinx. And he sent 2 of his men in, and they came out covered with sores. So the pharaoh covered over the entrance and placed a statue of the god of the underworld on top of that entrance. When the Sphinx was uncovered in the 1850s, they found a statue of the god Osiris, who in the New Kingdom was the god of underground tunnels, a broken statue of Osiris right in front of this box.
If you look down into the box,
It's just flat. There's nothing, there's no indication there that, that there's something there. Oh, and Casey said, like I said, Casey said it wouldn't be discovered until the selfish motives of the world were broken up. And he said that there were guards placed there. He didn't say what the guards were, but there were guards placed there to protect it. Now, the Great Pyramid of Giza has 8 sides. How many people here knew that the Great Pyramid had 8 sides? Oh, that's good. That's very good. The way that they discovered this was that a British military pilot flew over the Great Pyramid at sunset on the fall equinox and noticed this shadow right here on the Great Pyramid. Clearly, the second pyramid has 4 sides, but the Great Pyramid has 8 sides. And the way that they accomplished this was the builders of the Great Pyramid indented one side, 1% from the other, such that this shadow only appears for 5 minutes at sunrise and sunset on the equinox, or the equinoxes. So it's only 5 minutes, 2 days out of the year that this shadow appears. And it's just by chance that they discovered this. So Casey said that the Great Pyramid was built with prophecies in stone that were correct as to the day, place, time, and individuals involved. So I asked myself, how do you build a pyramid to indicate an exact day, place, and time 12,000 years into the future? Well, you indent one side 1% over the other, such that a shadow only appears for 5 minutes twice a year. So the builders of the Great Pyramid are telling us that some future prophetic event will occur on one of the equinoxes at sunrise or sunset. So I want to tell you a little personal story about this photograph for me personally. About a year ago, I called my literary agent and just to chat. And after a while, she said, well, I thought you were calling me because you wanted to do a book. And I said, well, actually, I do want to do a book. I said I want to write a book called How to Be Rich, Happy, and Thin. And she laughed at me derisively. So I said, okay, well, what kind of book should I do? And she said, well, why don't you do something edgy, like on the edge of everything, and something really out there? And I said, oh, I can do that. I can do another book on prophecy. So I started doing my book on prophecy. And the first thing, as an astrologer, the first thing I did was to look at the astrology of the next 30 years up to 2050 to see if there's something there that indicates that the prophecies would be fulfilled. Well, what I found was that the best day astrologically, or one of the two best days astrologically in the next 30 years, is the sunrise on the spring equinox in 2026. So I was very excited about this. I thought, oh, that's really nice. We'll talk about that date or whatever. So then I got down to finishing up the book. I was on the last afternoon of the last day of the last page. I was going to work on the book. And I thought, well, I think I'll watch some TV. And I had a video of Graham Hancock's speech here at ARE a few years ago. So I thought, well, maybe there's something in there that, will give me some information. So I started watching the video, and he showed a photograph that he took. He got permission from the Egyptian government to get up on the back of the Sphinx. Now, what kind of pull does that take? On the spring equinox. And he took a photograph of the Sphinx head at sunrise on the spring equinox, and the sun was directly over the head of the Sphinx, because the Sphinx lines up with the rising sun twice a year on the equinoxes. So then I was very excited. I'm like, oh my God, this is an indication that the Hall of Records would be open on this future equinox. So I was very excited about that, very happy that I'd found that. Then about a week or so later, I discovered this photograph, and then it was clear as day that they built this pyramid this way to indicate that the Hall of Records is going to be opened at sunrise or sunset on a future equinox, and that this incredible lineup of planets in 2026 on the spring equinox at sunrise could very well be that time. So I was processing that for about a week or so, and then I thought, well, maybe there's more information in this photograph. Maybe I was driving home, I thought, maybe there's something there that I haven't noticed. So I actually had a business card from someone at ARE, and I took it and I placed it on this shadow right here, and I realized that this shadow points directly to the box by the right front forepaw of the Sphinx. So they have told us the time, and they have told us the place of the event by the way that they have built it. This is the arrangement of the Giza Plateau. This is the Great Pyramid here. This is the second pyramid. Here's the Sphinx. And one of the things that they have done, this is another illustration of it. You can see this side right here lines up directly with the right front forepaw box. They actually did a survey of the Giza Plateau with surveyors, literally down to the inch. And what they discovered was that this side of the second pyramid, they followed the line of it directly with the surveying instruments, and this is what they found. The line goes directly through the right front forepaw box, lines up directly with the right front forepaw. Then it goes through the exact center of the Sphinx temple. And the Sphinx temple was built at the same time as the Sphinx. They know that because it was made with the blocks that were taken out of the Sphinx enclosure. So the builders of the Great Pyramid and the Giza Plateau and the Sphinx, they arranged all this perfectly to tell us exactly when and where the Hall of Records will be opened. They have lined it up perfectly. And the Sphinx temple here has two doorways, which, of course, line up with the rising sun on the equinox, such that the sun will shine directly through these doorways on the equinox. And the place that I found all this was the website of Mark Lehner and Zahi Hawass, the two guys that are the biggest disbelievers in what I'm telling you. This is another representation. You can see the box here. This is the Sphinx temple. you can see how the line goes directly through the middle portion of the Sphinx temple. So I want to explain and show you the astrology of the next 30 years and how astrology works. I was asked on a radio show the other day, the first question the guy asked me was, what is prophecy? And that kind of threw me for a loop. It's such a general question, it really made my mind have to struggle to figure that out. And then I started to think, well, for me, it's not about what is prophecy, but who is accurate in terms of prophecy? Who do you trust in terms of prophecy? Well, the three sources of prophecy that I have found, which are accurate, are Casey, Jesus, and astrology. And the way that I've found that astrology is correct in terms of prophecy is when you have large groupings of planets aligned in either good or bad aspects. When the influences are very powerful, that's when you see them manifest in the activities of man on the earth. Now I'm talking about here mankind as a whole rather than individual astrology. So you see, when you see Mars squares, you see warlike things going on in the world. When you see planets arranged in good aspects, then people are making peace. You see this over and over again, and it's so convincing for me as an astrologer. Now, the way that astrology works is that 90 and 180 degree aspects are bad, and 60 and 120 degree aspects are good. I saw a show on television, and there were all these scientists. And the entire show was about debunking astrology. And there were these physicists on there, and they were saying there's no scientific proof whatsoever that astrology works. Well, that's not true. Scientists have discovered that there are solar storms in the solar system when the planets are at 90 and 180 degree aspects with each other. So there's literally a physical proof of astrology that 90 and 180 degree aspects produce disharmonious energies within the solar system itself. And then 60 and 120 degree aspects create harmonious energies. And these aspects are so powerful that the Jewish calendar, the high holy days, are arranged with astrology in mind. The Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, is the holiest day of the year for the Jews. And they have a lunar calendar such that on every Day of Atonement, the sun and the moon, they are in a 120 degree aspect, which is the best possible aspect. It's called a trine. So they have literally set up their religious holidays such that their holiest day of the year would have the two largest influences, the sun and the moon, in good aspect with each other. They set it up that way on purpose. So to my thinking, this is all there is to astrology. 90 and 180 degree is bad, 60 and 120 degree is good. So Casey tells us that Jesus was born on March 19th, 4 BC, just after midnight. And this is the astrological chart for that date. We have the sun conjunct Venus. Venus is love. We have the sun in good aspect with Jupiter, which is the ministerial planet, the preacher, the religious planet. The sun, we have Mercury and Saturn together, which is an aspect for a very precise mind. The Sermon on the Mount is certainly a good example of the workings of a very precise mind. Casey also said that, and this is the most important thing that people don't know about astrology. In fact, it might be the most important thing that there is in terms of personal astrology. Casey said that we all have planetary sojourns in between lives. That, for instance, Casey was cheated by a friend and died on the battlefield in a past life, and as he died, he was very, very angry with his friend, furious. So his soul immediately went to the vibratory level of Mars, which is anger, war, violence, and then he was reincarnated as a soldier in the Trojan Wars. And so this is how astrology really works. The influence of the planets, to a large extent, is from our own soul experiences and the way that we process that in between lifetimes. What Casey said that was so important with respect to charts, which nobody really knows unless you study Casey, is that the planet that is closest to the ascendant and the midheaven is the planet that your soul most likely took its flight from. In other words, that was the vibratory level that you were at between lifetimes, and then when you were born in the earth, that's where you came from. And that was the greatest influence. And I have used this in my personal astrology, and it's just been amazing in doing charts for people. But this particular chart is very interesting. In this chart, on the midheaven is the star of Arcturus. And Casey said that the star of Arcturus was sort of a way station, that is where you went, where you had achieved perfection in the earth. And so you would go to the star of Arcturus to either go on to other systems, assuming other solar systems, or come back to help. And on the midheaven in Jesus' chart in March 19th, 4 BC, is the star of Arcturus. So Jesus went to the star of Arcturus, that vibratory level, and came back to help because he had achieved perfection. Casey was asked in 1941 about a peculiar lineup of planets that was occurring during that time period. And Casey said that it was the forces of light and darkness battling on the earth. And May 10th, 1941 was the date of the largest bombing raid of the war on London. The Germans dropped incendiary bombs. A third of the city was destroyed. And in many ways, it was the low point of humanity for the 20th century. The Germans had conquered Europe. The Russians were not in the war yet, or the Americans. Britain was fighting alone against Nazi Germany. And it's reflected in the astrological aspects. We have the Sun, Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, this huge conjunction of planets, all in 30, 60, 90-degree aspect with Mars, the god of war, 30, 60, 90 degrees aspect with the moon as well. And then we have 180 degrees here. This is called a T-square. It's the worst of all possible aspects. Clearly reflected in the events of the time. And this is the kind of thing that I see all the time, constantly. Whenever you have these large groupings of planets, they are truly reflected in the events that occur with humankind on the earth. This is the chart for November 9th, 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall. If you were to pick the most significant event of the last quarter of the 20th century, the fall of the Berlin Wall would be it, and certainly the most significant positive event, really a break in history, if you will, like the kind of thing that we're talking about with the beginning of the age of Aquarius. We have Neptune and Saturn together with Venus, Uranus, and they're lined up 30, 60 degrees, not a good aspect, with the Sun, Mercury, Pluto, and Mars. Neptune and Saturn together, that's really the key. When Neptune and Saturn get together in good aspect, that is the physical manifestation of spiritual ideals. And clearly reflected in the political events at the time, because political freedom is a spiritual ideal. In addition, in November of 1989, UFOs appeared over Belgium. They were seen by thousands of people. They showed up on radar. They were chased by jets. The police saw them. Everyone saw them. They were there for months. And there was not a peep about it in the American press. I don't think I read about it until years later. But it was an extraordinary event. And that, to me, is also a manifestation of this Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Because Neptune rules outer space, like I said, mysticism and all that. And I believe that the folks flying UFOs are not Star Trek. They're not human beings flying UFOs. They're highly spiritual beings that evolved beyond where we are. So, having said that, what I looked at with, let's just go, well, let's see. I guess I don't have that one. This is the chart for March 20th, 2026. And I gave you guys a handout called The Awakening. And what this is it's an arrangement of the outer planets in positive aspect between 2024 and 2027. And this aspect is so unusual. I cannot emphasize how unusual this is. It only occurs every 35 to 60 or 70 years. It's extremely rare. And what makes it so powerful is, we have these good aspects all the time. We have aspects that are the best possible aspects you can have every few years, but they only last for a short period of time. For instance, in July of 2012, there was a grand trine with about 6 or 7 of the planets. And that's the best of all possible aspects. So that month, the United States and Iran started negotiating to get rid of their nuclear weapon program. The Palestinians and the Israelis got together for the first time in 4 years. But then the planets shifted, and the Palestinians and the Israeli negotiations broke down. But my point is that these large groupings of planets affect the human events on the Earth. But something like that only lasts a month, it only has influence for a month. Whereas this configuration with the three, with Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus, lasts for 3 or 4 years, every day. So it's a super powerful aspect. So if you were looking for an aspect for the transition from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius, that is exactly the kind of aspect that you would look for. And the most powerful configurations of that aspect come in 2026, specifically at sunrise on the equinox in 2026. Now, Casey said that planets had their greatest influence when they were on the ascendant, which would be sunrise, or the midheaven. So on that day, you're going to have Venus, Moon, Saturn, Neptune, and the Sun all conjunct together coming up over the horizon. In addition, you have the Saturn-Neptune conjunct the Sun, which is pretty amazing. Very powerful aspect. In addition, the way that we know what astrological age that we are in is the position of the Sun at sunrise on the spring equinox. So not only is this tied into these outer planet aspects, it's literally tied into the demarcation point between the age of Pisces and the age of Aquarius. It's really just an amazing, amazing aspect. But it's not just this one day, it's the whole time period. But there's a sort of crescendo to it. It starts in 2024, it builds. In 2025, there's sort of the flip side of this. Because if you're going to have a conjunction like this with Saturn and Neptune, the other planets, the Sun and the Moon and all the other planets, they're still moving through the zodiac. So periodically, they would badly aspect this Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And you see that in 2025. There's a number of bad aspects then. So I wanted to talk about the prophecies of Jesus. As I said, Casey, Jesus, and astrology are the two the three ways, I should say, that I found that you can predict the future. Dreams are another way. Casey said that nothing important happens to you that is not first previewed in a dream. So that's the easiest way to access psychic information for ordinary folks like us. In Matthew 24, Jesus is asked by the disciples, what will be the sign of your second coming and the end of the age? And then Jesus goes and lays out a specific series of events. What he does is he actually quotes the prophet Daniel word for word, telling the disciples that the prophecies of Daniel will be fulfilled at the end of the age. And the prophecies include what the fundamentalists call the Great Tribulation. Jesus said it would be a time of trouble such that there never was on the earth. The sort of apocalyptic vision that they have always talked about. My own personal feeling about this is there are several possibilities. Casey people have talked about pole shifts. It seems indicated that the Earth's magnetic field is decaying rapidly, so it's possible we could go through a magnetic pole shift. In addition, the apocalyptic event that we know for a fact will happen at some point is what's known as a coronal mass ejection. The sun will eject such a powerful force of particles that it could literally strip the ozone and bombard the earth with radiation. There's that possibility. In 1859, they had what was called the Carrington event, where the sun ejected so much energy that it set the telephone wires on fire. So in our modern civilization, the thing to be worried about with that is that it could wipe out our electrical system and all our satellites, such that we would suddenly have no electricity. And you can imagine how difficult that might be.
It goes quite a bit beyond that.
Yeah.
Everything that exists that has a microchip or a transistor in it will cease to operate instantly.
Yeah.
Cars, everything.
Yeah, it would all get wiped out. And
1890 instantly.
so my thought is that the Mormons are very smart. They keep 6 months worth of food on hand at all times. And in addition, there's this thing called the drinkable book. And it's a book that someone has created that you can tear the page out, and it can filter stream water, any kind of water, the worst water in the world, and make it pure. And each page can provide enough water for a person to survive for a month. And I thought, okay, if you've got 6 months worth of food and you have the drinkable book with the filter, then at least you'll have food and water as far as that goes. So after this tribulation period, there's a description in Daniel of an invasion of Israel, and that he says that the invader will be destroyed by fire. After that is the darkening of the sun and the moon, which seems to indicate dust in the air or some kind of geological change. The darkening of the sun and the moon is mentioned 6 times in the Bible. It's in the Quran. It's in the Jewish Bible. It's recognized by many of the world's religion as that omen of change, and then the return of Jesus. So Martin Luther King said that the arc of history is long and it bends toward justice. And the concept to me of the arc of history is very interesting, because we are now in a time period, and I don't think this is publicized enough, where we can kind of see, particularly with scientific discoveries and all that, we can see where the arc of history is going. Now, one of the things that Casey predicted was that there would be a new physical type of human being. He called it the fifth root race, and that this creation of this fifth root race would coincide with this break in history, the 1,000 years of peace, the age of Aquarius, whatever you want to call it. And if you look at what's going on with science, you can see how the arc in history is headed toward the fulfillment of many of the prophecies that we've talked about. Just recently, scientists have discovered how to, just within the last year, they've discovered how to manipulate the DNA and the RNA of all human beings on Earth, or excuse me, of all creatures on Earth easily and cheaply. So it was so profound, it was such a profound discovery that the scientists immediately had a meeting to discuss the ethical implications of all this. And they've already started to cure diseases using genetic engineering. So we are going to be able to genetically engineer human beings. In other words, we can create a new race of humans with science. Casey said that when Homo sapiens were created, he said that the way Homo sapiens were created, he said that the souls began projecting into matter and that they could move in and out. He said there was a rebellion in the celestial. The souls began to project into matter. They would project into trees, rocks, animals. They could move in and out of the spiritual realm and the physical realm at will. And gradually, over time, they became trapped in matter, and they became trapped in animal bodies, which we know as the primitive man. You know, Neanderthal, Australopithecus, Gigantopithecus. So there were many different forms of these primitive hominids. So Casey said that there was a group called the Sons of God who came in to help. And they decided that there had to be one physical human form. And they got together, and he said that they created this physical form. The Sons of God created this physical form, Homo sapien, modern man, through introgression. And the word introgression literally means gene splicing. And Casey said this before DNA was even discovered, which is just, it's just astonishing. So what the arc of history is telling us is exactly what the Casey readings are telling us, that we will be able to create a new physical human being. In addition, they have found liquid water on Mars. You see here, there's no water there. You see water flowing down the hill. They have found liquid water on Enceladus. This is the moon of Saturn. This is liquid water shooting out through the fissures in the ice. And the Cassini spacecraft actually flew through this and found that there is a salt sea on a liquid ocean on Enceladus, which probably has more water than all the oceans on the Earth. So what I'm saying here is that we're on the verge, wherever there's water, liquid water on Earth, there's life. So we're on the verge of finding life on other planets. I think this is all part of that break in history, because I think that the first contact with alien beings and that sort of thing is going to be part of that break. So the realization that there's life on other planets, other civilizations, that's all part of what's coming. I'm always amazed at these incredible stories that I see in the science section of Google News that you never hear on the regular news. They have discovered a metal made with magnesium that is lighter than aluminum, as strong as steel, which is easy and cheap to make, that is going to revolutionize the automobile and aircraft industries. It's made with a combination of magnesium and carbon nanoparticles. They figured out how to combine these evenly. It's going to be an extraordinary thing, and no one ever talks about these discoveries. In addition, talking about discovering alien civilizations and life on other planets, NASA has developed a satellite that they're going to send out called Starshade. And it's very, very interesting because when they look at other solar systems, and they're looking for Earth-like planets. They want to find Earth-like planets. Then once they find the Earth-like planets, they want to examine their atmospheres to find out if it has signatures of life or civilization. But the problem is that the suns of these planets revolve around are so bright that they can't block that light to get a good look at those Earth-like planets, because Earth-like planets are so small. So they figured out a very clever way to do this. They have a telescope here, and then they have this big sunflower-looking thing, and then there are slits in each one of these petals. And with these slits, they will be able to block out the light of the sun, whatever sun that they're looking at, so that they can identify hundreds of Earth-like planets. And then once they've identified hundreds of Earth-like planets, they are going to have telescopes in the next few years, which are 100 times more powerful than the Hubble telescope, so that they will be able to examine the atmospheres of those Earth-like planets, and then once they figure out which ones are most likely to have civilizations and life, then they can point the radio telescopes toward them to see if they can find alien civilizations. So the point I'm getting at is that we're on the verge of this. The arc of history with science is indicating that we're on the verge of creating a new race, first contact with alien civilizations. All of this is happening separate from the prophecies that we have been given by Casey and Jesus and all this. So it's just, for me, it's just a confirmation of all this going on, and we can literally watch this unfold. In 2018, NASA is sending up the James Webb Telescope. This is the one that's 100 times more powerful than the Hubble. And then the Starshade is going up in the 2020s. So this is the 5 great things that will happen in the future. And I think all of this happens at once, really. I think it's all part of that break in history. The opening of the Hall of Records. Casey said that the Hall of Records contained the history of man from 10 million years BC up to 10,500 BC. He said that it also contained artifacts from Atlantis, including musical songs, instruments, that sort of thing. Casey also said that Jesus would return during this time period. He said he will return in the body he occupied in Galilee. That's a direct quote from the readings. There will be 1,000 years of peace. I think first alien contact is part of this. Once we become a peaceful race, then it'll be okay for the aliens to contact us. And then, of course, the 5th root race begins coinciding with that.